These are Mr. Barry Newton's notes on the markets for Guyana sugar. The Commission of Inquiry, currently charged with recommending a way forward for the sugar industry, will have to balance complex socioeconomic considerations with the need to frame any recovery plan within the constraints imposed by major changes in the traditional markets for Guyana sugar. Guyana has always relied on the UK-EU market as its primary sugar outlet. From October 2017, this market will, for the first time for 70 years, have no management tools available and no guarantee of purchase by the UK government or the EU. The principle of the preference is not affected, and sugar supplies from non-ACP, that's Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, and LDC, which is least developed countries, will still be required to pay the tariff. However, the value of the preference will be diminished, if not destroyed, by the accumulative deliberate actions by the EU in its two major reforms of 2005 and 2017. The genesis of this disruption of the EU market price and access stability has emerged from two stages of common agricultural policy and sugar regime reform in 2005 and 2017, designed to meet a complex mix of long-term EU policy objectives interlinked with internal budget and external trade and development commitments. There are 5 of these. They are to curb the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, expenditure, to respond to World Trade Organization pressures to link preferential trade access through bilateral economic partnership agreements, EPAs. 3, to respond to a WTO limitation on subsidized exports. 4, to deter a surge in expansion of sugar in LDCs, least developed countries. And 5, to accelerate a policy to lower EU prices nearer to world market levels by increasing competition. Phase 1. At the time of the 2005 reform, the EU feared that the Everything But Arms EBA arrangement would generate a sudden rise in LDC production to take advantage of high EU prices. The WTO had adjudged subsidized EU beet sugar exports to be illegal, and as a result, any rise in imports would then be borne by the domestic suppliers. The 36% cut was designed to remove this incentive from the LDCs. Clearly, it also hit traditional non-LDC suppliers such as Guyana. Based on Guyana's average sale of 175,000 tons of sugar to the EU, it was anticipated to cost the industry $50 million per annum. These fears proved groundless, as a shortage of sugar in the world market in 2010 caused a spike in the EU market prices and a 3 to 4 year period in which it was higher than the old sugar protocol contract levels. Unfortunately, Gaisuco experienced poor production and was unable to take advantage of this boom time, in which both tonnages and prices were at a peak. A conservative estimate of this opportunity loss would be somewhere around $100 million. But there had also been a notional gain of $200 million by not having to bear the predicted 36% reduction. Phase 2. The 2017 reform will be a natural continuation of the drive to increase competition in the EU, and in particular to link internal prices to world market levels. The main new factor is the abolition of quotas for beet sugar and isoglucose or corn syrup. Whereas there has never been a limit on EU beet sugar production, the size of the food market defined the quantity of beet sugar quota allowed to be sold for food and drink use. This is after taking account of imports of cane sugar delivered in accordance with trade treaties, such as those for the ACP LDC countries. Overall imports of 3.5 million tons were assured by a managed balance sheet with a nominal reference price of 404 euros for refined sugar and 335 euros for raw. Depending on exchange rates, this is the equivalent in freight on board FOB Guyana terms to 15 US cents to 17 US cents per pound. There are significant differences between the two reform periods, and an escape from the planned market consequences of the 2017 reform is extremely unlikely, for two reasons. A, prices in the EU are already below the reference price. The 2011 to 2014 price spike coincided with relatively high costs in Brazil. However, the Brazilian real has been savagely devalued, bringing its cost levels and therefore world market price benchmarks down from 21 US cents a pound to 16 to 17 cents US a pound. B, a high price of recent years has generated considerable investment by EU beet growers and processors in improving efficiency. The 2006 to 2009 shakeout of 6 million tons of capacity caused the closure of over 80 EU beet factories and the loss of 120,000 jobs. This reduced the overall average cost in the EU. Further investments have enhanced operating efficiency, and some of the areas are now very efficient indeed, with ex-factory costs well below current Guyana levels. After 2017, opportunities for imports from ACP LDC will be restricted to key deficit areas, mainly in southern Europe, and even then will be subject to considerable competition from other ACP suppliers. Even if prices rise sharply for periods, the fact that beet is an annual crop and a desirable part of a rotation with grain will be a factor in speedily attracting new supply. Niche markets. Although there is a place for premium price special products such as Demerara Gold, A, if basic raw and refined prices fall, then the added value products such as Demerara and Muscovado also suffer a reduction. B, the overall EU market for, quote, special direct consumption sugar is probably no larger than 250,000 tons out of a total consumption of over 18 million tons. It is currently dominated by Mauritius, which has cultivated buyers for many years. C, there may be further outlets in the USA and regionally, but again, small tonnages are to be expected. The effects of reform. The prospects for Guyana in its traditional EU bulk raw market will not be easy. A, the EU's own assessment is that overall imports will fall from the current actual supply figure of 3.5 million to 1.9 million tons. There will clearly be intense competition from a number of traditional suppliers, including some of the world's lowest cost producers. 3, the government of Guyana, as the owner of Gaisuco, could determine that the socioeconomic benefits of the industry justify a high subsidy for large-scale sugar production. Care will need to be taken that competitors do not invoke WTO anti-dumping agreements, which limit this practice. 4, overall, it is difficult to conceive that Guyana will be able to compete at tonnage levels on which the current action plan of 2006 is predicated. This is approximately 450,000 tons. 5, alternatively, Gaisuco must determine whether it can restructure its land and processing assets to create a smaller core industry of the most efficient areas. The objective would be to reduce unit costs to a level at which they allow non-subsidized longer-term access in key deficit regions of the EU and also to the regional market. One of the primary stated objectives of the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA treaties, is to encourage greater intra-regional trading. 1, CARICOM, let alone CARIFORUM, has not, as far as sugar is concerned, given this any serious consideration. In part, this is due to national government pressures to give priority to supply to the US and the EU. 2, there is no doubt that a market exists within CARICOM, including Haiti, and the EPA extends its notional market to embrace the Dominican Republic and also, eventually, Cuba. These three countries in the North Caribbean add nearly 35 million consumers and 1.4 million tons of sugar consumption to the current CARICOM total of about 6 million people spread across 15 full member states and a very wide geographic area. It is estimated that current total consumption, including Haiti but excluding the DR, amounts to over 500,000 tons, of which 290,000 tons is imported as refined sugar. Excluding Haiti, the old CARICOM consumption is 140,000 tons of raw sugar and 190,000 tons of refined sugar. The DR and Cuba are already net exporters of sugar, but Haiti is a key potential consumer with no existing production facilities and a fast-growing population of around 10 million. Its current consumption is all imported, including some informal supply from the Dominican Republic, and this amounts to 100 tons of refined and 100,000 tons of refined and 70,000 of raw sugar. Its market, with supplies mainly from Colombia, is a large prize if the current generously low common external tariff of 5% can be amended to allow CARICOM competition. The regional market was a regular subject for debate at COTED and heads of governments meetings, but seems to have slipped off the political agenda. It must be addressed again as soon as possible. Major subjects for resolution are: A, establishing new realistic production plans for the remaining regional producers; B, providing serious formal commitment from producers to giving regional consumers priority in supply; C, defining raw, special sugar and refined sugar market segments with particular attention to a clear definition for tariff purposes of all so-called white sugars; D, review the potential future sources of regionally produced fully refined sugar, obtain a commitment to proceed and establish a timetable for introducing a realistic common external tariff, a CET. E, recognize that artificially low market price barriers in domestic sales cannot be sustained when metropolitan markets are no longer available to provide the high prices needed to balance the books. They also encourage informal sales to neighboring markets. F, removing all non-tariff barriers to trade in sugar within the region. G, reviewing current CET levels to allow regional producers to establish prices which are, quote, reasonably remunerative to an efficient producer with consideration for times of very low world price. This will need to be balanced by political consideration of end consumer interests. The Haiti special rate and sugar trade benefits currently enjoyed by Colombia must be addressed. This round, the latest further reform of the CAP, due for introduction on October the 1st, 2017, will create a seismic shift in the arrangements for ACP LDC sugar supplies to the EU. This will allow only the most efficient exporters to survive. Guyana is particularly disadvantaged by some basic structural problems. The climate and other geographic features are not conducive to cost efficiencies, and recent operating problems will add to the difficulties. While it may be possible to secure some continuing sales to the EU, all the evidence suggests that Guyana must shift its attention to other geographic markets, with the regional consumption appearing to be a priority. However, governments and consumers within CARICOM will not be prepared to pay an unreasonable price. The overarching message is that there will need to be a strong focus on unit cost reduction, essentially from improved agricultural productivity, to be able to compete with other regional producers and even with outside suppliers able to absorb any CET. With existing costs reported as being well over 25 cents a pound and some much higher, a new attitude is essential, and planners would be advised to follow Abraham Lincoln's exhortation. The dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must seek anew. We must disenthrall ourselves.